Okie dokie. I was producing a song and then Ableton crashed, so that kind of sucks. But anyway, I decided it'd be a good time to make a video right now. So I recently understood something that I didn't understand. Well, I thought I understood, but I didn't fully understand for a long time. And it's basically the idea of like the middle path that the Buddha talks about. And the middle path is one that it's basically between two extremes. One extreme is like eternalism or like essentialism. So it's like there is definite ontological, eternal like stuff at the foundation of everything. Like there is an eternal like thingness to things. So for example, that sounds really hard to grasp, but basically and when I say ontologically, I mean like, well, here, let me give you an example. So if I were to ask you about the concept of good, is good something that is inherent to reality or something we make up? So an or essentialist would say, if you had an essential view of good, right? If you believe that good was essential, you would say, well, good is something we found. Good is not something we made, but an inherent part of nature. So a lot of times, if you have an essential view like that, you're not. I feel like over the course of philosophical history, the more time has passed, if you hold an essentialist view, eventually it shaves down to there's one logos or meaning that's essential. You could look at that like God, like there's one thingest thing, like the thing that all other things are underpinned by, that is sort of like the platform for other not essential things to play out. So like some people say awareness, like conscious awareness, like you can't have an experience without awareness. So maybe that deep primal awareness beyond personality, beyond experience that you have whenever you exist, maybe that's the essential thing, and then everything else is built off of that. Or on the other extreme, you have nihilistic sort of like ascetism, where I think that's how it's pronounced, where basically like there is no essential thing, so there is no thing, there's no meaning, there's no because there's no fundamental underpinning to anything, and it's all sort of like free floating. Like good doesn't exist, the awareness doesn't even exist that you think would underpin everything in essentialism. Therefore, nothing has meaning, and nothing is ultimately intelligible in any kind of meaningful eternal sense. So the Buddha says, no, neither of those are true. Basically, the true nature of reality is everything is like a process. So like look at a whirlpool, right? If I were to say, oh, look at that whirlpool, but then you tried to actually articulate what the whirlpool is, well, at any given moment the state of the whirlpool is going to change, the ripples are going to change, so basically take that concept and put it to all of reality. All of reality is a process, even your conscious awareness. So like the essentialist would say, oh, awareness is the fundamental underpinning. Well, sometimes you're not aware. Is that because you have a lapse in awareness, and that awareness is still fundamental, but you just forgot that awareness, like when you sleep or before you were born? Or is it true that even the awareness that you think is so fundamentally underpinning everything is also a process? So in that way, there is no fundamental underpinning. And see, not even the process is essential, because the process isn't a thing, it's a relationship between things. So like the Buddha would argue, this relationship between things also wouldn't be essential, because in order for something to be essential, it would have to be like a thing, whatever that means. So like it would have to, I can't point to a process, so I can't point to the process of the whirlpool and equate that to every process, right? If you were to create like a set of all processes, like in set theory, like a set of all processes, so every process that there could ever be, you would essentially contain everything. In that case, everything would be contained in this set. And then the issue with that is, well, if you explain everything, you're also kind of explaining nothing. You know what I mean? Like if you make something so vague and so general that everything is encapsulated by it, nothing is. And that's another argument sort of against there being any essential thing, because if you find an essential thing, right, what's the point in distinguishing it anyway? Like, so ontologically, is there a way of knowing that the process even is an essential thing? Like, who's to say that processes are necessary either? Like, who's to say that processes won't just stop? So all of this stuff is very vague and hard to wrap your head around, and I'm still wrapping my head around it. But yeah, so this middle path is basically, there is nothing essential, but everything still has meaning because there's meaning in the processes that you find yourself in. So like, and then you can also develop an interesting theory of the self and say, okay, so the self is a process. It seems like there's some essential thing, like a soul, right? But if we take Buddhism into account, there isn't an essential thing. There's only processes that themselves aren't essential. So it's nothing. So everything is sort of like null, almost, right? So like it's hard because maybe it's a translational thing, I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just a difference between Western and Eastern culture. But everything having no sort of eternal basis, yet also still being meaningful, this middle path, means that you can live your life to the fullest easier, theoretically. So there's no essential good or evil that stops you from doing something. That being said, everything is meaningful, even though it doesn't appear that anything is essential. So a lot of but people don't live that way. See, that's the interest. So here's my interesting observation. People don't live as if Buddhism, in that middle path sense, were true, because you have to have a sense of self in order. Like, we evolved to have a sense of self. It's almost like we evolved to believe in essentialism in a certain sense. It's like we evolved to believe that us distinguishing between a river and a beach is useful, or us distinguishing between different colors. See, but historically, we didn't always have the colors we have. We didn't always have the distinction between rivers and beaches. So maybe they're not essential, or maybe we discovered them. In which case, is it the human mind and evolution that would make things essential? And how far does that go? So does this have to do with us being human, or us being alive in general, where we draw these distinctions? Where does that come from? Why would that be? Is it just by chance, or were we always going to? What does fate even mean? So like all of these really hard to grasp questions start coming up. But it's interesting because, as far as I can tell, contemporary philosophy is leaning toward that middle path sort of sense, and like a lot of thinkers today have rejected both nihilism and essentialism. So what's left is something in between, because those are the two extremes. What's left has to be between them. So, but yet we don't act that way. So it's fascinating. And I was thinking, well, this sort of sounds similar to Stoicism, like, the Eightfold Path, and then the teachings of Stoicism have a lot of similarities and a lot of overlap. So it seems to me, and I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that Buddhism is sort of maybe more close to the actual truth of the matter, whatever that means, than other philosophies, sure, and spiritual philosophies, I might add. But it seems like things like Stoicism are more practical, because that's their goal. So Buddhism, if you want spiritual enlightenment and you want to, go become a bodhisattva, that's what that's for. But if you're not down that very specific path, and you simply want to live mostly like a person, a normal person, and you still want to have the, core colors of Buddhism, I think it's maybe well expressed if you adopt something more similar to Stoicism, where you think about, you exercise what you can control, and then you try to not let what can't control bother you. You strive to be excellent, you strive to be virtuous, you have your core virtues of temperance, courage, wisdom, and justice, because all of those things help you not in the personal realm and in the social realm, and all of these things need to work together. Like in positive psychology, there's the self-determining theory, I think is what it's called. So you need to be autonomous, you need to be competent, and you need to be related. So you need to be an individual, you need to be good at something, or excellence, and then you need to be an individual. So in Stoicism, that would be things like being virtuous, of being wise, being temperate, being courageous. but you also need to be related. So that, justice plays into that. Living in accordance to nature is a big catch-all phrase for all of this. So when Buddha talks about the middle path and things like I forget what it's called, but the Buddha basically outlines there are these truths that we find that seem to be beyond reason and self-evident almost. Like he still guides you to them, but it's like things that are very general and very applicable. The Stoics would call that living in accordance to nature, but Buddha would call it, following the Eightfold Path or something like that. Anyway, so these are just some interesting thoughts about I'm more versed in Stoic teachings than Buddhism, obviously. A lot of that has to do with my upbringing. But yeah, so these are just some interesting thoughts, and just sort of getting them out there. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think what I said is interesting, if it's off the mark, if it's on the mark, anything to add. Any contemporary philosophers that can speak to this, or historians or something. Yeah. Anyway, peace.